Hello and welcome. I'm Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our election special show Battleground 2021, wherein we bring you all the details of the ongoing assembly election in 4 states and 1 union territory. Now, with the assembly elections around the corner, it is time for a shower of promises in party manifestos. Now, political parties are once again gearing up to publish their official stances on key policy issues. Some of them have already done so. This month has witnessed promises made by parties both informally through the speeches delivered by their leaders and formally through election manifestos. Now, political parties are trying their best to woo the voters, especially the youth and women in these poll-bound states. From promises of free laptops to color televisions and grinders, Tamil Nadu's political parties have tried to outdo each other in offering freebies ahead of the polls for decades now. Loaded with doles and freebies to woo the voters, the two parties, AIADMK, which is seeking a record third term, and the DMK planning a strong comeback after a decade in opposition, have unveiled their manifestos for the 2021 Tamil Nadu Assembly polls. Now, the ruling AIADMK has promised to give a government job to one person from every family, and that does not have anyone working in the government. Similar to DMK's manifesto, the ruling party's manifesto is peppered with many freebies, including free Amma washing machine, 6 free LPG cylinders annually to every family, free solar stove, while the DMK has promised to set aside 75% jobs for Tamils. On the other hand, the BJP's manifesto is also expected to woo the voters with its schemes and projects at the center with a focus on the youth. Now, the party is expected to promise huge numbers of schools for the backward community in other states as well. Now, Kamal Hassan's MNM chief also unveiled his party's manifesto, where he promised that education will be a priority and focus will be on girl children. Along with this, he even promised 50 lakh jobs for youth in 5 years. So this is a sort of a sum up of what exactly all political parties are promising in the state of Tamil Nadu. Even the Congress has also come up with this manifesto. Let's try and understand in the next 25 minutes what exactly do these promises mean and how different are these promises from the ones made earlier in the previous assembly elections by these political parties, and how successful they these promises and the manifestos are actually on the ground. And to understand all these nuances much better, we have with us two distinguished guests today. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Mr. Shekhar Iyer, senior journalist who is joining us from Delhi. And also we have a guest from the state of Tamil Nadu, another senior journalist, Mr. R. Bhagwan Singh, who is also joining us. Welcome, both of you gentlemen. And let me begin with you, Mr. Shekhar Iyer. Since we're talking about the manifestos in the state of Tamil Nadu, and all major political players have come up with their documents, the first question which I want to ask both of you is, how different are these documents this time around from the ones which we have seen from these parties in the previous assembly elections as well, in terms of promises and not only freebies but policy suggestions there as well?
Well, Vishal, it needed a lot of creative thinking, I would say, on the part of both DMK and the ADMK to come up with some more attractive, baits to the voters, because over the years they have promised a lot of things. Some have been implemented, some have not been implemented so well, but the fact remains today they are almost at their wits' end to find what will actually click. And I must say that Kamal Hassan has been rather more realistic, knowing that, of course, he seems to be the furthest away from, striking power compared to the other two parties. But nevertheless, I think his exercise seems to be a little more dwelling on the realistics and the futility of promising the heaven, when you cannot actually deliver. See, by March 2022, we understand the Tamil Nadu's public debt will go somewhere to 5.70 lakh crores. That's a kind of public burden they have on their heads. But then there are no end to announcements. We saw just before the election dates were announced, you heard the chief minister, announcing in the outgoing assembly that they are going to grant almost a crop loan waiver of 12,000 crores. Then there is some more crores going away for the sovereign gold, because a lot of women pledge their jewelry to take loans So that will also be done away with. Then you have self-women groups. There is no end to it. But this time, Vishal, I think there is a lot of political statements in the manifestos. Like the DMK manifesto talks of self-respect, trying to restore the self-respect for Tamil Nadu, trying to ensure that the autonomy is there for Tamil Nadu. Similarly, ADMK, despite an alliance with the BJP, talking of, that they will work towards the removal of the Citizenship Amendment Act. And at the same time, there is another political statement by way of promising, let's say, to improve the administration of temples, which has become a big issue. In fact, there is a campaign to free the temples from the government control. And the manifestos talk of, return of Hajj subsidy and then subsidy for Christian pilgrims to visit the biblical land, Jerusalem. And so you can see that the effort is to reach out to voters on various levels, at the economic level and to bring in a religious element. We saw that Rajshekhar Reddy and also, Jagan Mohan Reddy had promised similar schemes for people to visit, Christian community to visit their places, outside India, naturally, to Jerusalem and other places. So you can see that these promises are largely do not reflect the actual economic difficulties faced by the Tamil Nadu. When I spoke to one or two bureaucrats, survey bureaucrats, they were rather worried. They said, we do not know what we are going to do, whichever party comes to power, because the first thing we'll be asked to do is to come up with some announcements, and they do not know how they are going to do it. But nevertheless, see, this trend has been there from 1967 when the late Annadurai had promised, 3 measures of rice would be given free, and finally it came down to actually implementation. It was 1 measure. So there are a lot of promises. In fact, Congress has promised a phase-wise, bringing back prohibition in a phase-wise manner, which is again, I think, how implementable it is.
Okay, definitely. These are some tall promises out there. We will have to see as to, whichever political party comes to power, whether or not they're able to walk the talk there on these promises. But let me bring in Mr. Bhagwan Singh here as well. Mr. Singh, would you agree with what Mr. Shekhar was pointing? And it's pretty much evident in black and white as well that, the trend of wooing the voters with freebies in the state of Tamil Nadu continues unabated in this election as well, from, free data cards to washing machines to, the tablets as well, and several other such promises also. The question here is that have these two major players, shown a lot of creativity in the freebies segment and not that much on other aspects, as Mr. Shekhar is referring to?
My friend Shekhar had summed it up very well. All the promises, tall promises. And in fact, I wrote recently in a column of mine, the political parties which are now, which have just completed writing their manifestos and announcing them, there is a best prize given to the best idea. Like Shekhar pointed out, starting with MGR's noon meal scheme for the children, for the school children, which later they claimed, which is true. Even the UN acknowledged that it brought back the dropouts to the schools. Starting with that, every election saw ingenuity, unparalleled ingenuity. Each manifesto was better than the previous one, and it defied logic. One promise more than the other. Only yesterday, I was a witness. I was a participant in a debate where both the political parties, ADMK and DMK, the members on the panel, they were arguing that these freebies should not be dismissed as mere cheap gimmicks and bribes. They really lifted the standard of living of the people. I think this is a shameful statement in a democracy, that freebies like free washing machines and free color televisions should lift the economic status of the people. It should actually be the projects. It should be actually the long-term projects like employment opportunities, setting up of industries, not something that is devised 1 month before the election and forgotten 3 months after the election. And like Shekhar pointed out correctly, it is the headache of the IAS Babus, how they are going to generate the funds, how they are going to generate the excuses not to implement a freebie announcement in the manifesto.
Okay.
All these things. But what is happening is, anyway, you were saying something, Vishal. You want to say something?
No, please continue. I just wanted to add on one more question here. If you could, answer that as well. Now that we're talking about freebies, the other aspect of this promise of freebies here is, Mr. Singh, that what kind of effect does it have on the entire electoral outcome? Does it cut any ice with the voters, and if yes, and to what extent?
It does, because if the freebies were not delivered at all, we have seen over the elections, and I've covered elections from MGR's days in Tamil Nadu. A few freebies have not been implemented. They have come up with excuses for that. But by and large, like for example, Karunanidhi said the farm loans will be written off. Karunanidhi said color TVs for every household. And when he was sworn in at the Nehru Indoor Stadium, the massive indoor stadium in Chennai, just after being sworn in by the governor, the files were brought to Karunanidhi. On the table, he signed the order sanctioning the waiver of the farm loans, before the television cameras. So the people do know that, yes, promises are made, tall promises are made, but they're going to be delivered. And the targeted section, the targeted people, yes, this is going to happen to us. So they do swallow that. Okay. Unfortunately, it's a heavy burden on the budget. From where are they going to find, like what Shekhar pointed out, 5.7 lakh crore already the debts. In fact, the DMK delegate yesterday was asking the AIDMK man on the panel, put the state into deep red. From where are you going to find the money? From where the succeeding, if each succeeding, in fact, the Jayalalitha government, when she came to power, the first day in the assembly, she said, we are taking charge with so much of negative exchequer. There's no money at all. And it continues to today because of the freebies. The old Chinese proverb, don't give the man the fish, but teach him how to fish. That doesn't hold good.
Definitely, and that question applies to both the parties there, the one you're referring to, Mr. Singh, where will the money come from? Because both the parties are trying to outdo each other. But this question of how much effect, these freebies or doles have on the voters there. Mr. Iyer, your views there, if you look at the trend in terms of, the promises of freebies by the major political parties in the state of Tamil Nadu and compare it with the election results, how do you see things moving around?
Well, you see, in Tamil Nadu, in the absence of, towering personalities, this time in the election, you don't have Kalangar Karunanidhi, or you don't have Purashita Levi Amma, as they would say. Jayalalitha is not there in the scene. So with these people not in the scene, a lot of it depends on, how they have managed their social bases, how they have managed their alliance partners. And of course, finally, as Karunanidhi once described, the 2006 manifesto, the hero of the election, that is the manifesto. So therefore, there is a mixture of things which goes into, wooing the voters, apart from what happens, 48 hours before the polling, when, the allegations fly about one party trying to bribe the voters and the other party accusing the another party of, that apart, the actual act of wooing voters, which is less and the better, particularly in Tamil Nadu. We have already seen crores of money being seized by these income tax authorities and election commission flying squads. Now, this apart, the fact remains is the voter also feels, that this is all legitimate things that are due to him or her, because they all believe that politicians make money throughout the year. I mean, through those 5 years, and finally, they try to make up for the lack of governance for those years by finally, coming with something just before election. You see, the reaction among the voters is to these freebies is positive. There is no sense of shock. Like as Mr. Bhagwan Singh pointed out, they are not in a position, given the kind of their economic situation, to even take a look at what did this particular MLA do for us or what this particular party do for us. Of course, some of the schemes have done well, like Mr. Singh pointing out. Say, for instance, the distribution of cattle, for to the farmers. Then you had schemes like, Amma Canteen, which came up in the last elections, just before the last election, and that has done well. Something which Siddharamaiah tried to emulate in Karnataka with his own Indira Canteen. And we are hearing today Mamata has promised similarly a canteen. And Kamala Hassan has come with a very innovative approach. He has promised military-style canteens, where it is not about just a plate of food, It's about getting provisions, general provisions at a much cheaper rate, like our servicemen get. So there are, the general feeling is, of course, but the point that which Kamala Hassan made, which I think strikes me, because at least he has been honest enough to, concede a point that a lot of these promises are unimplementable, but rather he would focus on governance. But I do not know whether that kind of pledge to focus on governance will cut much ice with voters who are obviously looking for some immediate relief, given the financial distress that they have gone through in the last few years.
Okay. Clearly, that is a tough choice there as far as the voters are concerned. And obviously, the political parties specifically, when they are trying to draft their manifesto there. But Mr. Singh, I'd like to bring you in. You earlier referring to how, there's a need to bring in, credible projects or policy suggestions into the manifestos. And if you're looking at all these manifestos, specifically the two major political parties, there seems to have been some effort made to focus on certain groups. For example, one of the parties talks about increasing the reservation for women from 30% to 40%. The other party talks about how there needs to be a focus on youth as well, and a student community. The young, obviously, voter is the target here. So you think that's something which is still a silver lining there in all these freebies and doles?
Vishal, as I pointed out earlier, for discussion, for reading, and for just comparing one manifesto with the other, they do make good reading, filling in where there are gaps. Like, for example, addressing the needs of the women, having reservation for women, and opportunities for youth. This should be there over the last 5 years. Why only think about it now? The point is, I've seen in election after election, what really matters is there are three things here. I kind of rewind to about 10 years. Yeah, I think about 10 years. I was in a college, in a women's college, where I was sharing the dais with a former chief election commissioner of Tamil Nadu. And he was telling me, and basically we were there to tell the students, they are all first-time voters, please do come to vote. That's another problem. Most of these people, they don't come to vote. This chief election commissioner, former chief election commissioner, he was telling me, Bhagwan, my biggest worry, at that time, there was a by-election in Madurai, near Madurai, and that became a kind of a benchmark for money for roads. The DMK, Karunanidhi's son, first son, Alagiri, was in charge there. And he was telling me, I was worried only about the political parties bribing the voters, political parties paying money for the vote. But now I'm worried because the people have become corrupt. The people are demanding. The people are asking how much will you give? And that's become worse and worse. So now, in each election, the main factor is how much will I get for this election? Because I think people are not really looking at, we are not, unfortunately, in our democracy, I'm not saying that there should be a distinction, we should distinguish between educated and uneducated, but we should lift the literacy. You see each government, what is the kind of percentage in their budget for education. For a politician, it is fine if the electorate remains uneducated. Like a lamb can be led by the nose to the polling booth with the promise of money, with the promise of a bottle of liquor and biryani. This is what that matters. And another factor that goes into play is the anti-incumbency. Tamil Nadu, you've seen, except that in the case of MGR, when 13 years Karunanidhi, the DMK, was in Vanvas, when MGR was ruling. Only after MGR's death could Karunanidhi come back to power. So the people of Tamil Nadu do get bored once in 5 years. So it will be very tough to manage this anti-incumbency factor.
Okay.
So the manifestos do make good reading, a little bit of an impact, but what impacts is this incumbency factor plus the money that they offer. Now they are talking about $1,000, 1,000 rupees per vote. Somebody is saying 500 rupees per vote. And like Shekhar pointed out, Tamil Nadu tops so far in the seizures by the flying squads of the Election Commission.
Okay.
And as you know, the rule is for every seizure, there are at least 10 that have gone undetected.
Definitely, the election authorities are working, really hard over time to take care of that aspect which you were referring to, Mr. Singh, in terms of use of money and muscle power in elections. And obviously, the machinery is working there on the ground. But let's take one last question, this time from Mr. Shekhar Iyer, before we bring this discussion to an end. And that is, we would like to also understand, Mr. Iyer, as to what kind of sense do you get from these manifestos in terms of what these parties are, what kind of strategy these parties are trying to adopt in this election? Because obviously, it's really crucial for both sides. While for AIA DMK's EPS, obviously, it is, a time to go ahead and stamp his final authority. If he wins this election, obviously, he retains the hold on the party for a long time. And same for Stalin's DMK as well. They've been out of power for 10 years. They wouldn't want to miss this chance.
Definitely, the DMK, though it has an edge, knows that the challenges are quite humongous because in the absence of a very visible way, for or against any party, it matters more that you are able to reach out to every voter. So if you just look in terms of manifestos, what I do see is there are elements which may be doable. What I would say easily doable. Those are wrapped in, the big promises. Probably these parties think that when they come to power, whoever comes to power, probably they could start with, say, implementing the doable part. Like, for instance, the DMK promise of 1,000 rupees for every homemaker. And similarly, 15. I mean, these are something they could, somehow weave it around the PDS system or DBT and say that, look, we have started with something. Because 1,000 rupees for a very poor family, is a big deal. It's a very big deal. And probably these are those little ones, I think, which is what, if they are doable, without the bigger commitments, then probably the parties, feel that, they have done a lot or they have implemented that promise. Because today in these elections, what we are seeing is the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister, the incumbent EPS, is saying, look, there are a lot of things we have already done. And they are there to see. So we are in a better position to implement those promises. So and similarly, Stalin says, look, our track record. We have done a lot in the past. So there is one, you have the immediate past and one which is more than 10 years ago. So trying to rejig memories of what has been done to people, how the promises have been implemented. But I think the parties are looking at, realistically speaking, on those smaller doable items, which I think may matter a lot to the voters.
Okay. So there it is. Thank you so much, Mr. Shekhar Iyer and Mr. Bhagwan Singh as well for sharing your views and inputs here on trying to understand what exactly does the manifestos released by political parties in Tamil Nadu indicate to one thing, which is pretty much clear, as our panelists were pointing out, that the culture of freebies in the politics of Tamil Nadu continues unabated, and this is pretty much evident from the manifestos released recently, specifically by the two major political parties, DMK and AIDMK out there. We'll have to wait and watch as to what exactly will the voters decide this time around, and what is their final decision in terms of who gets to sit on the throne in the state of Tamil Nadu, who wins this election, forms the government out there. But from us, a simple appeal to all the voters in Tamil Nadu and other states as well, please do cast your vote and also do not fall prey to any kind of inducements there. We'll come back again, and next week we will talk about the same aspects, that is the political parties' manifestos in other states, West Bengal, Assam and Kerala, and obviously the Union Territory of Puducherry as well. Till then, keep watching Sunset Television. Thank you.
Watch